Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the Soviet Union. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you are watching us from and the exact time you are listening to this narration. We are interested to know to what places and at what moments of the day or night these documented accounts reach. The morning of October 15th, 1962, dawned grey and silent over the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. The Soviet space program had been celebrating a series of remarkable achievements. But what happened on that autumn day would remain buried in classified files for decades. According to documents that surfaced in 1968 during a routine archive reorganization, a mission existed that bore no official designation, carried no public acknowledgement, and involved a cosmonaut whose name appeared on no roster. The man designated as Cosmonaut Zero was Dmitry Volkov, 34 years old, a former test pilot whose psychological profile contained unusual annotations. Born in Voronezh, Volkov had distinguished himself during the war as someone capable of maintaining absolute composure under extreme duress. His medical records, discovered years later in a misfiled cabinet, described him as having exceptional tolerance for isolation and minimal emotional response to stress stimuli. These qualities, rather than his technical expertise, appeared to be what qualified him for the assignment. In the months preceding October, Volkov had been living in a restricted compound 30 kilometers from the main cosmodrome. The facility, according to architectural plans found in 1964, consisted of a single concrete building surrounded by high walls and electromagnetic shielding. Workers who constructed the site reported that the interior contained a perfect replica of a spacecraft capsule, but one fitted with monitoring equipment they had never seen before. The construction crew was transferred to distant projects immediately upon completion. Volkov's daily routine, as documented in fragmentary logs kept by his handlers, followed a precise schedule designed to prepare him for prolonged isolation. He spent 18 hours per day inside the replica capsule, consuming only condensed food and recycled water. The remaining 6 hours were allocated for physical maintenance and what the documents euphemistically termed psychological conditioning. No details of this conditioning survived in the recovered files, though a maintenance worker later reported hearing sounds from the building that he described as neither human nor mechanical. The purpose of Volkov's training became apparent only through cross-referencing multiple sources. A procurement manifest discovered in 1966 listed materials that included radiation shielding far exceeding standard specifications, communication equipment designed for extended deep space transmission, and life support systems rated for missions lasting significantly longer than any publicly announced Soviet space program. Most notably, the manifest included items described only as isolation protocol materials and return contingency equipment. 3 weeks before the October launch, unusual activity began at Baikonur. Personnel not assigned to the mission were granted unexpected leave, and entire sections of the facility were declared off-limits for routine maintenance. The normal complement of engineers and technicians was replaced by individuals wearing no identifying badges or rank insignia. These replacement personnel communicated only through written notes and displayed behavior that several witnesses described as mechanically precise but somehow wrong. Dr. Elena Kozlova, a psychologist who had been monitoring Volkov's preparation, submitted a report dated October 10th expressing concerns about his mental state. Her report, found among personal papers donated to an archive in 1967, described Volkov as having developed what she termed adaptive detachment syndrome. He had begun speaking only when directly questioned, showed no emotional response to stimuli that would normally provoke reaction, and demonstrated an unsettling ability to remain motionless for hours. Most disturbing, according to Kozlova, was his growing reluctance to acknowledge the existence of other people unless they served a direct function in his routine. The spacecraft itself bore little resemblance to the Vostok capsules that had carried Gagarin and other celebrated cosmonauts into orbit. Technical specifications, partially reconstructed from scattered documents, described a vessel significantly larger and heavier than standard Soviet spacecraft of the era. The additional mass came from equipment whose function remained unclear, though references in the files suggested capabilities for operations beyond standard orbital parameters. The craft's communication array was particularly unusual, featuring transmission equipment powerful enough to reach Earth from distances typically associated with interplanetary missions. On the night of October 14th, Volkov was moved to the launch site under extraordinary security measures. The transfer occurred between midnight and 4 in the morning, when most personnel were off duty. Guards who witnessed the movement reported that Volkov appeared calm to the point of appearing sedated, though medical logs from that period contained no record of any pharmaceutical intervention. He walked to the spacecraft with mechanical precision, acknowledged no one, and entered the capsule without ceremony or farewell. The launch occurred at 5:17 in the morning, precisely 17 minutes before the normal shift change. No public announcement preceded the launch, no dignitaries observed from the viewing stands, and no journalists documented the event. The rocket's trajectory, calculated years later from fragmentary telemetry data, indicated a path that would take it far beyond standard orbital altitude. Unlike typical Soviet missions, which followed predictable patterns designed for relatively quick return, this trajectory suggested a destination that would require weeks or months to reach. Communication with Volkov continued for the first 72 hours following launch. Transcripts of these exchanges, discovered during a file reorganization in 1969, revealed increasingly strange patterns in his responses. Initially, his transmissions followed standard protocols, reporting instrument readings and system status in clear, professional language. By the second day, however, his communications had become sparse and oddly formal. By the third day, he was responding to questions with minimal acknowledgements, often providing only yes or no answers when detailed reports were requested. The last verified transmission from Volkov occurred on October 18th at 11:43 in the evening. According to the partial transcript that survived, Mission Control attempted to establish routine contact but received only silence. After several hours of unsuccessful attempts, they finally received a single transmission lasting 4 seconds. The audio quality was described as distorted beyond normal technical parameters, but the voice was identified as Volkov's. The content of this final message was recorded as distance achieved, though some technicians present claimed they heard additional words that were not officially transcribed. Following this transmission, all contact with Volkov and his spacecraft ceased. Mission Control continued attempting communication for 2 weeks, broadcasting on all designated frequencies. The silence that answered these attempts was described by operators as having an unusual quality, not merely the absence of signal, but something that seemed to absorb their transmissions. Several technicians reported equipment malfunctions during these attempts, though engineering reviews found no technical explanations for the problems. The official response to Volkov's disappearance followed patterns established for other classified missions that encountered difficulties. His name was removed from all personnel rosters. His personal quarters were emptied and sealed, and all individuals who had worked with him were transferred to unrelated assignments. Dr. Kozlova submitted 3 additional reports requesting information about Volkov's status, but received no responses. Her final report, dated November 20th, noted that her requests for clarification had been returned marked "no such individual on record." In the months following the mission, several anomalies occurred that may or may not have been connected to Volkov's disappearance. Radio operators at monitoring stations across the Soviet Union reported receiving brief transmissions on frequencies that matched those assigned to the lost spacecraft. These transmissions, occurring irregularly over a 6-month period, consisted primarily of technical data and numerical sequences that corresponded to no known Soviet communication protocols. The content suggested measurements and observations, but of phenomena that existing scientific understanding could not explain. More troubling were reports from individuals who claimed to have worked on Volkov's preparation, but whose employment records showed no such assignment. These people, scattered across various installations, described identical memories of working with a cosmonaut who displayed increasingly unusual behavior. Their accounts contained details about the training facility and preparation procedures that matched documented evidence. Yet their names appeared on no official lists of project personnel. When questioned further, most became evasive or claimed to have misremembered their assignments. The facility where Volkov had trained was dismantled in November 1962. Workers assigned to the demolition reported finding the interior in a condition they described as impossibly clean, as if the building had never been occupied. The replica spacecraft capsule had been removed, leaving only mounting points in the floor and walls. Most strangely, several workers reported that the building's acoustic properties had changed, creating echoes and sound distortions that had not been present during construction. Dr. Elena Kozlova disappeared in January 1963 while traveling to Moscow for what she described to colleagues as a consultation regarding patient follow-up. Her personal vehicle was found abandoned beside a rural highway, showing no signs of mechanical failure or accident. Her briefcase, containing notes and files related to her psychological assessments, was missing. Local authorities conducted a brief investigation that concluded she had likely suffered some form of personal crisis and left voluntarily. No evidence supported this conclusion, but no alternative explanation was pursued. The documents that eventually revealed details of Volkov's mission surfaced under circumstances that remain unclear. In 1968, during a routine relocation of archived materials from a storage facility in Plesetsk, workers discovered files that had been incorrectly catalogued and forgotten. The papers were mixed among routine administrative documents and had been scheduled for destruction as part of standard document lifecycle management. A clerk who recognized unusual markings and classification codes set the materials aside for review. The recovered documents were incomplete and heavily damaged by moisture and deterioration. Many pages contained only fragments of text, and entire sections of reports were illegible. However, enough material survived to piece together a partial picture of the mission and its aftermath. The documents included personnel files, technical specifications, communication logs, and what appeared to be psychological evaluation reports, though many of these were too degraded to read completely. Analysis of the surviving materials revealed inconsistencies that raised questions about the mission's true purpose. The technical specifications suggested capabilities far beyond what the Soviet space program had achieved by 1962, including life support systems designed for missions lasting months or years. The communication equipment described in the documents would have been capable of maintaining contact across distances greater than the Earth-Moon system. Most puzzling were references to extended isolation protocols and deep mission parameters that seemed to assume Volkov would be traveling far beyond Earth orbit. The psychological profiles and evaluation reports painted a picture of a selection process focused not on technical competence or heroic qualities, but on psychological characteristics that would allow an individual to function in extreme isolation for extended periods. The assessments described ideal candidates as those who demonstrated minimal social bonding, ease, reduced emotional responsiveness, and adaptive detachment capabilities. These criteria differed dramatically from the psychological profiles of known Soviet cosmonauts, who were selected for their ability to represent the Soviet state and inspire public confidence. Communication logs from the mission suggested that Volkov's spacecraft had achieved a trajectory that would have taken it beyond the gravitational influence of Earth. The data, fragmentary and difficult to interpret, indicated that the craft had continued accelerating well beyond what would be necessary for orbital insertion. If the calculations contained in the documents were accurate, Volkov's spacecraft would have reached a velocity sufficient to escape not only Earth orbit, but the entire solar system. The most disturbing element of the recovered documents was a series of reports filed in the weeks following Volkov's disappearance. These reports, submitted by various monitoring stations and observatories across the Soviet Union, described anomalous signals detected from the direction of Volkov's last known trajectory. The signals were characterized as structurally complex and exhibiting patterns suggesting conscious intent, but analysis could determine no specific meaning or content. More troubling were reports of visual observations made by astronomical facilities during the same period. Several observatories reported detecting an object moving against the stellar background in the region where Volkov's spacecraft should have been located. The object appeared to be emitting light in patterns that did not match any known astronomical phenomena. The observations were brief and could not be repeated, leading most astronomers to dismiss them as equipment malfunctions or observational errors. In the spring of 1963, reports began surfacing from various locations across the Soviet Union of individuals claiming to have received transmissions on personal radio equipment. These people, scattered across thousands of kilometers and with no apparent connection to each other, described receiving broadcasts that consisted primarily of numerical data and brief verbal communications. The voice in these transmissions was consistently identified as speaking Russian with an accent and speech patterns characteristic of the Voronezh region. The content of these alleged transmissions varied, but common elements included coordinates that corresponded to no known locations on Earth, technical data that described equipment and procedures unknown to civilian science, and brief personal messages that seemed to be addressed to specific individuals who could not be located. Several recipients attempted to respond to these transmissions, but reported that their responses seemed to be absorbed or lost, generating no return communication. Investigations into these reports revealed that the individuals making the claims had no apparent connection to the space program, military facilities, or each other. They represented diverse backgrounds, ages, and geographic locations. However, detailed interviews revealed that all had been exposed to radio equipment during the specific time frame when Volkov's mission was believed to have been active. Most troubling, several of these individuals possessed knowledge of technical details about Volkov's spacecraft that had never been made public and remained classified. The Soviet space program officially denied the existence of any mission matching the descriptions contained in the recovered documents. When questioned about Dmitry Volkov, officials stated that no individual by that name had ever been associated with the cosmonaut program. Personnel records for the Baikonur facility showed no evidence of the specialized training compound or the unusual activities reported for October 1962. The consistency of these denials, maintained across multiple agencies and levels of government, suggested a coordinated effort to obscure any trace of the mission. However, independent research conducted years later revealed subtle inconsistencies in the official record that supported the existence of classified activities during the relevant time frame. Budget allocations for the space program showed unexplained expenditures during 1962 that exceeded documented program costs by significant amounts. Personnel transfer records indicated unusual patterns of assignment and reassignment during the same period, with numerous individuals receiving postings to remote facilities immediately following their work at Baikonur. Most significantly, analysis of launch schedules and facility usage logs revealed gaps that corresponded precisely to the dates when Volkov's mission was alleged to have occurred. These gaps were explained in official documents as routine maintenance periods or equipment testing phases, but the duration and timing of these activities differed from standard operational patterns. The consistency of these gaps across multiple documentation systems suggested deliberate coordination to obscure specific activities. The question of Volkov's ultimate fate remained unresolved, despite years of speculation and investigation. The trajectory data suggested his spacecraft had achieved sufficient velocity to leave the solar system entirely, but the technical limitations of 1962 space technology made such a journey survivable only under conditions that existing science could not explain. The communication logs indicated that Volkov had remained conscious and functional for at least several days after launch, but his final transmission contained elements that defied conventional interpretation. The reports of continuing radio communications suggested the possibility that Volkov had survived his journey and was attempting to maintain contact with Earth. However, the content of these alleged transmissions described experiences and observations that fell outside the boundaries of known physics and space science. If genuine, the communications indicated that Volkov had encountered phenomena that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of space, time, and reality itself. Alternative explanations for the evidence were equally troubling. If Volkov had not survived his mission, the source of the continuing transmissions remained unexplained. The technical sophistication and specific knowledge demonstrated in these communications exceeded what any terrestrial source could have produced using 1962 technology. The possibility that some other intelligence was using Volkov's identity and knowledge to communicate with Earth raised questions that official investigators were apparently unwilling to pursue. The psychological evaluations contained in the recovered documents suggested that Volkov's selection for the mission was based on characteristics that would have made him particularly suited for surviving extreme isolation and psychological stress. His demonstrated ability to maintain emotional detachment and functional behavior under conditions that would devastate most individuals indicated preparation for experiences that far exceeded normal space mission parameters. The question remained whether this preparation had been sufficient for whatever he had actually encountered. Dr. Elena Kozlova's disappearance added another layer of complexity to the case. Her expertise in psychological evaluation and her documented concerns about Volkov's mental state suggested she had possessed information that others considered dangerous. Her final reports, submitted just before her disappearance, had expressed increasing alarm about the psychological effects of Volkov's training and preparation. The content of these reports, beyond the fragments that survived, might have provided crucial insight into the mission's true purpose and expected outcomes. The facility where Volkov had trained was not merely dismantled, but completely erased, with even the foundation removed and the site returned to its original condition. This level of obliteration exceeded what would be necessary for normal security purposes and suggested an effort to eliminate any physical evidence of what had occurred there. The reports of unusual acoustic properties and the building's impossibly clean final condition indicated that something about the facility itself had been changed by its use. The broader implications of Volkov's mission extended beyond questions of individual fate or technological achievement. The evidence suggested that the Soviet Union had attempted to send a human being on a journey that transcended normal space exploration entirely. Whether this mission was intended as scientific exploration, an attempt at contact with unknown intelligences, or something else entirely remained unclear. The level of secrecy and the subsequent efforts at concealment indicated that the mission's true purpose was considered too sensitive for normal classification procedures. The continuing reports of anomalous transmissions and observations suggested that Volkov's mission, whatever its original intent, had produced results that continued to manifest years after his disappearance. The consistency and technical sophistication of these reports, combined with their wide geographic distribution, made simple fraud or delusion unlikely explanations. If genuine, these phenomena indicated that Volkov's journey had established some form of ongoing connection between Earth and whatever destination he had reached. The psychological profiles of individuals who reported receiving transmissions revealed another disturbing pattern. Many described experiencing dreams or visions following their radio contact that contained elements consistent with the technical data and observations included in the alleged communications. These experiences occurred repeatedly and with remarkable consistency across individuals who had no contact with each other. The psychological impact of these experiences often included lasting changes in behavior, outlook, and social relationships. Medical examinations of these individuals revealed no obvious explanation for their shared experiences. However, several displayed subtle neurological changes that neurologists could not attribute to any known medical condition. Brain imaging studies showed patterns of activity that differed from normal populations in ways that suggested enhanced sensitivity to electromagnetic phenomena. Whether these changes were the result of exposure to unusual transmissions or some other factor remained undetermined. The question of whether Volkov had been intended to return from his mission became crucial to understanding its purpose. The technical specifications suggested preparation for a one-way journey, with life support systems designed for extended duration, but no apparent capability for return to Earth. This preparation differed dramatically from all known Soviet space missions, which were designed with recovery and return as primary objectives. The implications of deliberately sending a human being on an irreversible journey raised ethical and practical questions that official investigators appeared unwilling to address. Alternative theories about the mission's purpose focused on the possibility that Volkov had been selected not for his technical skills, but for his unique psychological characteristics. His ability to function in extreme isolation and his documented emotional detachment might have made him suitable for missions involving contact with unknown intelligences or exploration of phenomena that would psychologically devastate normal individuals. This interpretation suggested that the Soviet Union had possessed knowledge of conditions or entities that required specially prepared human representatives. The time frame of Volkov's mission coincided with other unusual activities within the Soviet space program that only became apparent through subsequent analysis. Several other classified missions during 1962 involved equipment and procedures that differed significantly from standard space exploration activities. Personnel assignments during this period showed patterns that suggested coordination of multiple unusual projects. The overall pattern indicated a concentrated effort to achieve objectives that went far beyond the publicly announced goals of the Soviet space program. International monitoring of Soviet space activities during this period detected anomalies that were not fully understood until years later. Radio telescopes in other countries recorded signals from Soviet space missions that included unusual frequencies and transmission patterns. Some of these signals appeared to be directed not toward Earth, but toward specific coordinates in deep space. The purpose and content of these transmissions were never officially acknowledged by the Soviet Union. The recovery of documents related to Volkov's mission in 1968 occurred during a period of significant reorganization within the Soviet space program. Many classified projects from the early 1960s were being reviewed, consolidated, or terminated. The discovery of Volkov's files, among materials scheduled for destruction, suggested that knowledge of his mission had been deliberately buried even within the organizations that had conducted it. The fact that these documents survived at all appeared to be the result of administrative oversight rather than intentional preservation. Analysis of the surviving documents revealed evidence of additional missions that shared characteristics with Volkov's assignment. References to other individuals who had undergone similar preparation suggested that Volkov was not an isolated case, but part of a broader program. However, details of these other missions were not included in the recovered materials, and subsequent investigations found no additional documentation. Whether these other missions had been completed, cancelled, or more thoroughly concealed remained unknown. The psychological preparation described in Volkov's files included techniques and procedures that bore no resemblance to standard astronaut training. The methods appeared designed not to enhance performance or survival in known space environments, but to prepare individuals for experiences that could not be adequately described or predicted. This preparation suggested that mission planners possessed knowledge of conditions that Volkov was expected to encounter, but that fell outside normal human experience. The communication equipment installed in Volkov's spacecraft represented technology that was significantly more advanced than what the Soviet Union was known to possess in 1962. The specifications described transmission capabilities that would not become available to civilian or military organizations for decades. The source of this technology was not identified in any recovered documents, raising questions about whether the Soviet Union had access to technical knowledge that originated outside their normal research and development programs. The medical and psychological monitoring equipment included in Volkov's mission was equally advanced, featuring sensors and analytical capabilities that exceeded contemporary medical technology by significant margins. The purpose of this monitoring appeared to be not merely ensuring Volkov's survival, but gathering detailed data about human responses to conditions that existing science could not predict or prepare for. The sophistication of this equipment suggested that mission planners anticipated encountering phenomena that would require real-time analysis and adaptation. The final transmissions from Volkov's spacecraft contained technical data that described environmental conditions inconsistent with any known region of space. The readings indicated gravitational fields, electromagnetic phenomena, and energy signatures that did not match predictions based on contemporary astrophysics. If accurate, these measurements suggested that Volkov had encountered regions of space where fundamental physical laws operated differently than expected. The coordinates included in these transmissions did not correspond to any known celestial objects or regions of space that had been previously explored or observed. When these coordinates were extrapolated using known stellar positions and movements, they indicated a location that would have been impossible to reach using technology available in 1962. The accuracy of these coordinates was later verified through independent astronomical observations, but the method by which Volkov could have reached such a location remained unexplained. The personal messages included in the alleged post-mission transmissions contained references to individuals and locations that could not be identified through any available records. The names mentioned in these communications did not appear in any Soviet personnel files, civilian registrations, or historical documents. However, the level of detail provided about these individuals and their relationships suggested intimate personal knowledge that would be extremely difficult to fabricate. Some of the personal messages appeared to be directed toward family members or associates of individuals who had worked on Volkov's mission, but whose involvement had been officially denied. The content of these messages included information about personal lives, family histories, and private conversations that could not have been obtained through normal intelligence-gathering methods. The accuracy of these details was confirmed through discreet investigations, but the source of Volkov's knowledge remained unexplained. The psychological impact of Volkov's mission extended beyond the individuals who had directly participated in its planning and execution. Personnel who worked at facilities where his training had occurred reported persistent dreams and psychological disturbances that began shortly after his launch and continued for months afterward. The content of these experiences often included elements that matched details from the classified mission documents, even though the affected individuals had no official access to this information. Medical evaluation of these personnel revealed patterns of neurological activity that suggested exposure to electromagnetic phenomena of unusual intensity and frequency. However, no source for such exposure could be identified within the facilities where these individuals worked. The timing and consistency of these effects indicated a connection to Volkov's mission, but the mechanism by which his activities could have affected individuals thousands of kilometers away remained unexplained. The families of personnel involved in Volkov's mission experienced unusually high rates of psychological disturbance and social disruption in the months following his launch. Children in these families displayed behavioral changes that included obsessive interest in astronomical phenomena, persistent nightmares involving space travel, and apparent knowledge of technical details related to space exploration that exceeded their educational background. The consistency of these effects across multiple families suggested a common cause related to their parents' involvement in the classified mission. Educational and psychological evaluation of these children revealed advanced understanding of physics, astronomy, and space technology that could not be explained through normal learning processes. Several demonstrated ability to solve complex mathematical problems related to space navigation and orbital mechanics, despite having no formal training in these subjects. When questioned about the source of their knowledge, the children consistently claimed to have learned these concepts through dreams or conversations that they could not clearly describe. The long-term effects of exposure to information about Volkov's mission appeared to include enhanced sensitivity to electromagnetic phenomena and improved performance on tasks requiring spatial reasoning and mathematical calculation. Individuals who had worked on the mission consistently scored higher on tests of these abilities compared to control groups with similar backgrounds and education. The enhancement appeared to persist for years after their involvement in the project had ended. Neurological studies conducted on former mission personnel revealed structural changes in brain tissue that neurologists could not explain through any known medical process. These changes were most pronounced in regions associated with sensory processing and spatial orientation. The modifications appeared to represent improvements in function rather than damage, but the mechanism by which they had occurred remained unknown. No medical intervention or environmental factor associated with the mission could account for these changes. The question of whether Volkov's mission had achieved its intended objectives remained unanswered due to the absence of clear information about what those objectives had been. The evidence suggested that the mission had produced results that exceeded the expectations of its planners and had established conditions that continued to manifest years after Volkov's departure. Whether these results represented success or failure depended on criteria that had never been made explicit. The ongoing reports of anomalous transmissions and observations indicated that Volkov's mission had created some form of permanent change in the relationship between Earth and whatever region of space he had reached. The consistency and persistence of these phenomena suggested that his journey had established a connection that transcended normal physical limitations. The nature and implications of this connection remained subjects of speculation and concern among the few individuals who possessed knowledge of the mission's existence. International intelligence agencies eventually became aware of irregularities in Soviet space activities during 1962, but their investigations failed to uncover specific details about Volkov's mission. The level of secrecy surrounding the project exceeded even that of the most sensitive military space programs. The absence of any acknowledgement or documentation in official Soviet records suggested that knowledge of the mission was restricted to a very small number of individuals who maintained absolute silence about their involvement. The technological implications of Volkov's mission extended far beyond space exploration into questions about the limits of human knowledge and capability. The equipment and procedures described in the recovered documents suggested access to scientific principles that had not yet been discovered by mainstream research. Whether this knowledge had been developed through conventional means, obtained from external sources, or represented breakthrough discoveries that were never published, remained unknown. The philosophical implications of sending a human being on a journey into the unknown without possibility of return raised questions about the ethics of exploration and the responsibilities of governments toward their citizens. Volkov's apparent willingness to undertake such a mission suggested either extraordinary dedication to scientific advancement or psychological conditioning that removed normal human concerns about survival and return. The moral dimensions of such preparation challenged conventional understanding of consent and human autonomy. The possibility that Volkov's mission had achieved contact with intelligences or phenomena beyond human understanding opened questions about humanity's place in the universe that most people were unprepared to consider. The implications of such contact for human civilization, knowledge, and future development could not be assessed without better understanding of what Volkov had encountered and what information he might have gained through his journey. The silence that surrounded Volkov's mission for decades reflected not only the political sensitivities of the Cold War era, but also the profound uncertainty about how such information should be managed or disclosed. The potential consequences of public awareness of humanity's ability to travel beyond the solar system, or of the existence of phenomena that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality, might have justified the extraordinary secrecy that characterized official responses to the mission. The gradual emergence of fragmentary information about Volkov's mission through accidental document discoveries and unofficial testimony suggested that complete concealment of such extraordinary events was ultimately impossible. The human impact of participation in activities that transcended normal experience created lasting effects that eventually manifested in ways that could not be entirely controlled or hidden. The persistence of anomalous phenomena related to the mission indicated that some consequences of transcendent exploration could not be contained within normal administrative or security procedures. The question of whether other nations had conducted similar missions remained unanswered, but was suggested by patterns of unusual activity and technological development that occurred during the same time frame. The concentration of advanced space technology development during the early 1960s might have reflected competitive responses to knowledge or capabilities that multiple governments had independently discovered or obtained. The absence of public acknowledgement of such capabilities did not necessarily indicate their non-existence. The legacy of Volkov's mission continued to manifest through the individuals whose lives had been touched by knowledge of its existence. The psychological and physiological changes observed in former personnel suggested that exposure to information about transcendent exploration produced lasting modifications in human consciousness and capability. These effects appeared to be passed on to subsequent generations through mechanisms that conventional medicine and psychology could not explain. The children and grandchildren of individuals who had worked on Volkov's mission displayed consistent patterns of enhanced ability in areas related to spatial reasoning, electromagnetic sensitivity, and intuitive understanding of complex technical concepts. These traits appeared to be inherited, but were unlike any known genetic characteristics. The persistence and consistency of these effects across multiple families suggested that involvement in transcendent exploration produced heritable changes that affected human development in fundamental ways. The ultimate significance of Volkov's mission might not be fully apparent until generations had passed and the full scope of its consequences had become clear. The immediate effects on individuals and families represented only the beginning of changes that might reshape human consciousness and capability over time. The question of whether such changes represented evolution, enhancement, or something entirely different remained open to interpretation and investigation. The story of Dmitry Volkov and his secret mission into the unknown represented more than an isolated incident of Cold War space exploration. It suggested that humanity had already taken steps beyond the boundaries of its earthly existence, and that the consequences of such exploration continued to unfold in ways that could not be predicted or controlled. The silence that surrounded these events reflected not only political considerations, but also the profound uncertainty about how to understand or respond to experiences that challenged every assumption about human limitations and possibilities. Years passed, and the occasional reports continued to surface. Radio operators across Eastern Europe claimed to receive transmissions that matched the technical characteristics of Volkov's spacecraft communications. The messages, when transcribed, contained coordinates that led to empty regions of space and technical data that described equipment far more sophisticated than anything available on Earth. Most disturbing were the personal messages that accompanied these transmissions, addressing specific individuals by name and containing information about their private lives that could not have been obtained through any conventional means. The locations from which these transmissions appeared to originate changed over time, following patterns that suggested movement through regions of space that had never been explored or observed. If the coordinate data was accurate, the source was traveling at velocities that exceeded anything achievable through known propulsion technology. The trajectory suggested a journey that encompassed not only the solar system, but regions far beyond the reach of any terrestrial space program. In 1969, the last documented attempt to investigate Volkov's mission occurred when a team of researchers tried to locate and interview surviving personnel from the project. Their investigation was terminated abruptly after they discovered that most of the individuals they sought had died under unusual circumstances or had simply disappeared without explanation. The researchers themselves suffered accidents or health problems that forced them to abandon their work. Their partially completed report was classified and filed away, joining the growing collection of documents related to events that official sources insisted had never occurred. The final entry in the fragmentary record of Volkov's mission was a brief notation found in a weather monitoring station log from 1970. The entry, written by an operator whose identity was never determined, recorded the reception of a transmission on the frequency that had been assigned to Volkov's spacecraft. The message, transcribed in the operator's handwriting, consisted of a single phrase: "Journey continues beyond measurement." The operator who recorded this message could not be located for questioning. The weather station's personnel records showed no employee matching the handwriting, and the entry itself appeared to have been made using ink that was not part of the station's standard supplies. The authenticity of the entry could not be verified, but technical analysis confirmed that the frequency referenced had indeed been assigned to classified Soviet space missions during the early 1960s. Today, more than half a century after Dmitry Volkov disappeared into the darkness beyond Earth, questions remain about what he found there and whether his journey truly ended or simply extended into realms that human understanding cannot encompass. The silence that surrounds his mission reflects not only the political sensitivities of a different era, but also the profound challenges of comprehending experiences that transcend the boundaries of earthly existence. And perhaps, in the quiet moments between radio static, in the spaces between the stars that our instruments cannot quite reach, something continues to transmit signals carrying knowledge of distances that cannot be measured and discoveries that cannot be shared. The cosmos holds its secrets carefully, but sometimes in the deep darkness of space, echoes return from journeys that should have ended long ago. The final documented evidence of Volkov's mission emerged in 1975 during the demolition of an abandoned telecommunications facility in Siberia. Workers discovered a hidden room beneath the main building containing equipment that had been monitoring deep space communications for over a decade. The machinery was still operational, automatically recording transmissions from coordinates that matched those last reported by Volkov's spacecraft. The recordings, spanning years of intermittent signals, contained technical data describing phenomena that defied conventional understanding of physics and space. Most significantly, they included detailed observations of stellar formations and cosmic structures that would not be officially discovered by Earth-based telescopes until decades later. The accuracy of these advanced descriptions suggested that the source possessed observational capabilities far exceeding anything available to terrestrial science. Among the final recordings was a transmission dated December 21st, 1974, that differed markedly from previous communications. Instead of technical data or coordinate information, this message consisted of what appeared to be a personal reflection spoken in Volkov's voice. The clarity was remarkable despite the apparent vast distance, as if the transmission had been recorded in a nearby studio rather than broadcast across interstellar space. The content of this final message was both haunting and enigmatic. Volkov spoke of discoveries that had fundamentally altered his understanding of existence itself, of encountering phenomena that suggested consciousness and intelligence operating on scales that encompassed entire galaxies. He described experiencing time in ways that rendered linear progression meaningless and observing the universe from perspectives that revealed hidden connections between all forms of matter and energy. Most disturbing was his description of Earth as viewed from his current position, which he characterized as both infinitely distant and intimately close. He spoke of watching human civilization develop along pathways that seemed predetermined, as if the entire course of terrestrial history was following patterns established by intelligences that operated beyond human comprehension. His observations suggested that humanity's future had already been determined by forces that transcended individual choice or collective action. The transmission concluded with Volkov's statement that his mission was entering a new phase that would require abandoning his remaining connections to human identity and terrestrial existence. He indicated that further communication would become impossible as he progressed to states of being that could no longer be expressed through language or concepts comprehensible to human consciousness. His final words were a simple acknowledgement. The journey transforms the traveler beyond recognition or return. Following this transmission, the monitoring equipment recorded only silence. Technical analysis confirmed that the machinery continued to function properly, but no further signals were detected from the coordinates associated with Volkov's spacecraft. The absence was described by technicians as having an unusual quality, not merely the lack of transmission, but a profound emptiness that seemed to absorb rather than simply fail to produce electromagnetic phenomena. The discovery of this monitoring facility prompted a brief investigation by officials who had not been aware of its existence. The equipment bore no identifying markings or documentation that explained its purpose or origin. The facility's construction predated any known authorization for such installations, and no records existed of the personnel who had built or operated it. The sophisticated monitoring technology exceeded the capabilities of any known Soviet communications program by significant margins. The investigation was terminated when several officials involved began experiencing the same psychological disturbances that had affected earlier personnel connected to Volkov's mission. The facility was sealed and the area declared off-limits for environmental reasons that were never specified. The recordings were classified and transferred to archives, where they joined other materials related to events that officially had never occurred. In the years that followed, reports of anomalous phenomena gradually diminished and eventually ceased entirely. The families affected by connection to Volkov's mission experienced a gradual return to normal psychological patterns, though enhanced abilities in certain areas persisted across generations. The children who had displayed unusual knowledge and capabilities grew into adults who pursued careers in science and technology, contributing to advances that seemed to exceed what their educational backgrounds should have made possible. The question of what became of Dmitry Volkov was never definitively answered. The evidence suggested that his journey had carried him beyond the boundaries not only of the solar system, but of human existence itself. Whether this transformation represented death, evolution, or something entirely different remained a matter of speculation among the few individuals who retained knowledge of his mission. The broader implications of Volkov's disappearance extended far beyond questions of individual fate or technological achievement. The evidence suggested that human consciousness was capable of transcending the limitations of terrestrial existence under conditions that contemporary science could not explain or replicate. The possibility that other individuals might achieve similar transcendence raised questions about the future of human development and the ultimate destiny of consciousness itself. The silence that eventually surrounded all aspects of Volkov's mission reflected not only official policy, but also the profound difficulty of comprehending experiences that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality, consciousness, and human potential. The few documents that survived suggested that humanity had achieved capabilities that exceeded its understanding, and had encountered phenomena that rendered conventional knowledge inadequate. Today, more than 6 decades after Dmitry Volkov vanished into the cosmic darkness, the night sky holds different meanings for those who remember the fragments of his story. The stars that once seemed distant and unreachable now represent pathways that human consciousness has already traveled, destinations that remain accessible to those prepared to abandon everything that defines terrestrial existence. And in the deepest silence of space, where electromagnetic radiation fails to penetrate and where conventional physics loses meaning, perhaps something that was once human continues its journey toward understanding that transcends all boundaries of knowledge and being. The cosmos keeps its secrets, but sometimes, in the space between heartbeats, in the pause between thoughts, echoes return from distances that cannot be measured, carrying whispers of transformations that await those willing to surrender everything familiar for the infinite unknown. The mission that began with a single man in a spacecraft had become something far greater, a demonstration that the boundaries of human existence were not fixed, that consciousness could transcend the limitations of flesh and time and space, and that the universe held possibilities that rendered every assumption about reality incomplete. In losing Dmitry Volkov to the infinite darkness, humanity had discovered that it was capable of reaching far beyond its earthly origins. The journey continues in ways that can no longer be documented or understood, toward destinations that exist beyond the capacity of human language to describe or human imagination to encompass.